2 people in the room with us.
Thanance for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
We kind of decided that if nobody showed up, we're just going to do our podcast. So you guys can
We'll field questions afterwards.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a lot.
No questions.
There you go. Great.
Any chance you guys are Sega or Saturn fans?
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Or were you just looking for a nice quiet place?
So you're looking for a place.
We're cool with that too.
As long as you brought us.
The worst panel I ever did ever.
Oh, that was in a fart. Sorry. There's the chair.
Oh, that's always just the chair.
It's just the chair, guys.
The worst panel I ever was on, I was invited to a con in Winnipeg in Canada once, and there was no one in there except for this one lady, and we were like, oh, do you have any questions for us? And she's like, I just came in here for a quiet place to read. And we were like, wow.
Great party.
Okay.
Funny.
I gotta change my. Okay, there. Data saver.
Data. Okay.
Anyway, well, everybody over there.
Hey,
Pat's
got a
phone.
live audience
Hi.
too.
Live audience here and on YouTube. This is a SHIRO show, Adam Korlick panel collab on a Friday at Game On Expo. Anybody still outside? Like, is there still?
No, see, the thing is, this is a weird day for this phase of it, because at this point, people are either down in the dealer room or they're like going home. It's also Friday, so. Yeah. So anyway, we're gonna be here to just kind of tell some stories. I've got some prototype consoles and stuff like that we can talk about. I think you guys know one of them very well.
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So we'll start with this, but I guess we should introduce ourselves. So I'm Adam Korlick, YouTuber. You guys obviously.
TraynoCo, SaturnDave from Sega Saturn SHIRO, podcast and website about Sega
Saturn and sometimes Sega CD.
So, yeah, sometimes
And sometimes dental equipment.
Yeah,
we'll
get back to that.
We have all the generations of consoles. We had Sega CD, Sega Saturn, and dental equipment. I like it.
So yeah, well, I guess we can start with this. This is the Sega Pluto prototype right here. Now, what's interesting about this is a version of the Sega Saturn, as I'm sure you guys know very well. However, it was never released. There was only 2 of these. Well, technically, Sega made 6, 4 of which were just like white mock-ups.
Yeah.
And then they destroyed 3 of those. One of them ended up, the only one that survived, ended up in the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas, where it's still on display.
Right.
And the other 2 units just kind of mysteriously vanished. One ended up in Japan, and that's the one that surfaced on the internet back in 2013. And a buddy of mine, I guess he found this one when he was a kid in a flea market in California. And we are pretty sure what happened to it is some employee was just like, nobody cares about this, and he just sold it. The dude was asking $5, and my buddy bought it for free. Oh, yeah. Now, what it ultimately is a prototype version of the Sega Saturn that you can kind of think of as going to like PS4 to PS4 Pro or even PS5 to PS5 Pro. It's a Sega Saturn that had a built-in modem, built-in hard drive. There's a little bit of additional RAM in there, and then other stuff we're not totally sure of. But we know now, thanks to those emails that kind of surfaced like last year, that Sega was basically planning to do like Xbox Game Pass, but for the Saturn in 1997.
Right, yeah.
And maybe you guys can fill me more on that, because you're definitely the Saturn.
I imagine they would have used so they wanted it to be an internet device that would be an alternative to an expensive computer, right? And they wanted to market it at like 400, that was impossible. 500, I think it was like 550.
Yeah, 550.
And Japan was just like, hell no. We'll make you a prototype, but nobody's gonna buy this at 550. But they actually did sell the Saturn and Netlink bundle to schools and stuff as like an alternative. And it had a 28.8 kbps modem. And you had a keyboard and a mouse and everything. And I imagine the hard drive would have been great for caching web pages, because if you've ever used the Netlink, it's kind of slow. And once you cached a few images, then you have to start all over again. It was not until they got to the Dreamcast that internet browsing became a little less clunky, but even then, so yeah, that would have been an answer to having a hard drive. Would have allowed you to do maybe online games like Dragon's Dream and download content to the hard drive, but you'd also been able to actually use the World Wide Web and
maybe even download games.
Reasonable.
Yeah, well, based on those emails, it sounds like the Game Pass, but like the hard drive is a 520 megabyte hard drive, which is pretty much enough for any one Saturn disc.
Yeah.
Not every disc, but
or extra content too.
Yeah, exactly. If they'd done that.
They had Habitat, which was like almost like Facebook back then. It was like social media way before social media, and it was like this little Second Life kind of program in Japan. through the Nifty servers, and I imagine content could have been downloaded to the drive for that as well. You know, like avatars,
You can get your hero avatar or whatever.
little tunes. I don't know, like all sorts of stuff. But yeah, there was nothing. There wasn't even any format data on that hard disk.
It was completely blank. We even bought a duplicate one just so we can show people what the hard drive itself looks like. Because the hard drive is inside of a like a special.
Oh,
mount.
you bought like a duplicate laptop?
Ben Heck actually.
Oh, nice.
So this is the mount. Inside this is there's a hard drive. We bought a duplicate one because it was just like some stock like Seagate hard drive from back then.
Yeah.
You know, you got to remember prototype proof of concept, so they're just kind of putting stuff in there that they thought worked.
Yeah, they just got off a desk with some dude that's worked at Sega. Hey, can I borrow this prototype PX5?
Now, funny enough, I took this thing to Sega of Europe, and there was only one person in there who even knew what it was.
Yeah.
But they were cool letting me like tour with it. I'm sure you might have seen photos of me online. It was like, yeah, I'm working around Sega.
Oh yeah,
Only like
that is the best traveled. Always joke.
the most traveled
Most
console
traveled console.
in human history.
It's high class.
Dude, this thing has been to the Tinian atomic bomb sites.
Wow.
So it's a little radioactive.
No. That's where like when at the end of the war when they took the like you saw Oppenheimer.
Right.
I assume.
Yes. No.
And so at the end of the war, like they delivered the bombs to an island called Tinian, which is still in American territory.
Mhm.
And they loaded them onto the atomic bombers and they flew them off. And they built these little like museum bits around them. I was there last year. This was too.
That was there.
This thing has also been to Enola Gay, which is in Washington D.C., which is the plane that did it, and it's been to the Boxcar, which is in Ohio, which is the plane that dropped the second one. My point is, it gets around. It's been to a lot of places.
That's right.
Yes, you were absolutely right. Most well-traveled console. Well, funny enough, this is its first time in Phoenix.
Yeah,
It's also
really.
been-
Yeah, isn't that odd?
Yeah, it's first time in Phoenix. Okay, but it's made its
Don't leave it out of the sun. Let's
few
give it a
It's
good
been
sun.
a couple
and
times.
it's been played quite a bit because it has a satiator in it.
Yeah, which makes life
Highly
easier.
recommend folks look into ODEs, optical drive emulators, if they want to get dip their toe into the Saturn library, as it's not cheap. I often recommend that if folks are interested in collecting for Saturn, that they kind of dip their toe in with an ODE or burning disc is kind of
Burning disc is probably the
see what you
recommendation.
love, see what you fall in love with, and then maybe buy a game or two, and put them on, so you can have something that you really like, but you don't have to go after the entire collection. Like you have every Dreamcast game.
Every Dreamcast.
That
I'm more of a Dreamcast
that
guy than I am.
Right, but that kind of commitment meant you had to start years ago.
Oh, I did. I finished in 08.
Right.
Nobody cared at all back then.
I still want that Divers 2000 TV.
Yeah,
That's
See,
I've still got it.
So I went
I need
Saturn
to buy
Saturn
those.
route, but I slept on the Dreamcast too long, and now I feel like it's too.
Oh yeah, it's way too late.
It's
Yeah,
too late.
yeah. I cared. So it was, I fell in love with Sega for obvious reasons as a kid, and then, when the Dreamcast ended, it was like I had this guilt trip with my age where I was just like, man, if I had supported more, Sega would still make consoles, which was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I thought, naively, if I go around buying the games, maybe that'll fix it. Of course, it's stupid to think that, but I did it, and before I knew it, I was like, well, I've got all the American ones, but there's a bunch of European ones like Shenmue 2 that never came out here, so let me get some of those.
Right.
Realizing there's only like 24 that came over there that we never got. So it
So it's
seemed,
not bad for a
Yeah.
complete library.
it seemed doable. And then I looked into the Japanese stuff, and it's like, they had like 300 or something odd games that we never got.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, actually, it's more than that. It's like 500, something like that.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and so I was like, that's a pain. But I did it because back then nobody cared. So you just buy them in bulk, we ship them all over. Most of them are like, there's some good ones in there, but then there's a lot of like date sim garbage you can't really play. Now I own a copy of Orange Blossom, and I'm like, I'm never gonna do anything with that.
It looked pretty. Touchscreen looked pretty.
Yeah. Although I will say, the rarest one, if you're ever out there collecting Dreamcast stuff, which I realize this is a Saturn-oriented podcast, but the rarest Sega Dreamcast game is the 6th part of a 6-game series they did called Rauen no Torikagu, which means like birdcage.
Okay.
So there's an entire video about this online that I actually contributed to and got them footage and everything. Basically, there was this horror drama series in Japan, like a TV show.
Right.
And back then, there was only 2 ways to release it. This is pre-streaming. This was actually pre-DVD, so they didn't actually have a way to release it. So they put out VHS tapes, but the other idea they had was put them out on Dreamcast discs. But they were afraid, we want this to come out in a serialization, so we can't just release all the discs and have everybody just watch everything and jump ahead. So it became an online dependent game where you had to check in with Sega's server and unlock the next episode.
Right.
Which stopped being supported like a year after the game came out.
Oh,
Now, they did 6 discs of this. The first one was the only one sold at retail, and after that, every single one was only sold through Sega Direct, which was kind of like, if you remember Club Nintendo?
yeah.
You had to like get it through there. And the last one of that, by the time the last one was done, it was so dead and unpopular, even in Japan, they just barely technically released it. They only put out 200 copies.
Oh, wow. That's actually really, really.
Yeah, it's so uncommon that a few years ago, Sega brought me to Sega Fest for like promotion of the re-release of Shenmue.
Yeah.
And they happened to also coincide with the 20th anniversary of the Dreamcast. So they had like a full like Dreamcast set, every single game. They did not have that.
Oh, wow.
I own 2 copies.
Wow.
I got it when nobody cared. Nobody cared at all.
So speaking of Dreamcast,
Yes.
I want to mention something. While we're still on it, because we're going to go back to Saturn. But so there's this new homebrew game that just dropped, like between last SHIRO show, last Friday, and now. It was over the weekend. It was Frogbowl. Yeah, he developed this. I don't know. It's a work in progress, but it's essentially like a Star Wars Rogue Squadron.
Yeah, if you ever played that on the N64.
For the Dreamcast. Yeah, and he distributed it to a few folks so that they could show it off. It's a really promising start. I'm hoping. I was talking to Adam. I was saying I'm hoping that he fleshes it out and really like releases it in a finished form, even if it's like one level campaign.
Sure.
I think that would be awesome.
So are you asking my thoughts on it?
Sure, I am.
So unfortunately, he did not send it to me. Otherwise, I would have tried it too.
Okay.
Yeah. So what he did was he grabbed a bunch of assets from the N64 games and then he polished them up, I guess, from my understanding. And he made his own like custom Star Wars game.
Right.
It sounded like he had AI doing the voice of Anthony Daniels.
He did.
Because I was like, there's no way he actually got
It
it.
actually worked pretty good.
It did.
Yeah.
So you can play, I guess, the first level of this just trying to reach the Star Destroyer. And the fact that they're making it or Frogbowl is doing that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But the fact that he sent out the demo doesn't imply he intends to continue, just based on feedback.
Yeah.
But I would be surprised if it ever gets finished. Like, I hope it does. If you're watching, dude, we're all supporting you. We're all rooting.
He might be.
He
He
is
actually
watching
does
right
watch.
now. Yeah, he is watching, and I'm
Dude, we're a big fan of what you're doing. Keep doing
Dreamcast is the little daughter of the Saturn, is his last comment. Actually, no, we have like 40 people with us.
Oh, we have more people live on.
We love you too, though. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Shouts out. What's your names?
Brad. Hey, Brad.
Brad and Carolyn, you are the unsung heroes of this podcast.
Yeah,
Thank you. We literally could not have done without you.
You're on tape too. Literally physically tape.
Yeah, we'll probably take his tape recording and just do like an edit job on this and put it out, for folks. But I mean, so Frogbowl's thing, he's a PC coder. His thing has really been like proof of concept, like getting these things up and running. Like, what was it? The Metal Gear Solid on the Saturn. Crazy. Like, at first, everybody was skeptical. Like, is this even real? No, yeah, it's totally real. The first, introduction level of Metal Gear Solid running on the Saturn, albeit with the Saturn's idiosyncrasies and ways that it renders 3D.
Let's say visual limitations.
Visually, it looked pretty good to me.
No, I know, but I'm agreeing. But
exactly.
Like,
and he's done like several different projects. So with this, I know that this project specifically, I was telling you, seems a little bit more original. I mean, even though it is derivative of Rogue Squadron, it attempts to create a new campaign, like a new experience.
As opposed to just creating like 64's Rogue Squadron.
Rogue Squadron, exactly. So yeah, my hope is that, and he did mention, he asked for feedback, and he took a lot of things into consideration, and it sounds like he plans on fleshing it out and trying to make it a playable, at least a very playable demo, if not like a mini
like a mini game with like 3 levels.
Couple different crafts that you can select from, a mission or 2 missions. I don't know. We'll see. How big
rooting for you.
I just hope that Disney doesn't shut me down before.
They won't.
Yeah, I don't think they care about it.
They don't care for multiple reasons. Like George never went after anybody. George Lucas never went after anybody for that kind of thing. But from my understanding of that sale, that he basically told Disney, like, don't go after people because you have to let them play in the sandbox for the sandbox to work.
Right.
And so unless he tries to sell it, which I can't imagine he would do, then I can't imagine Disney would ever care.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my guess. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I try to find one example of Disney actually doing that.
Yeah, I don't think
Star Wars
so.
in general. Like
they're not as.
They're very litigious on things, but not that. Disney,
not
Star
because
Wars.
Nintendo.
Oh, Nintendo would sue you for talking about it.
Nintendo would sue us for talking about
Which is why we have no Nintendo prototypes.
Exactly.
And that actually brings up a good point. I was actually looking at a thread on X the other day, and Twitter, X, whatever. And there's actually this thread about people like complaining about meeting people talking about like homebrew and band translation projects. Because apparently it's like getting like them shouting it out. I think maybe they're more aimed towards Kotaku and stuff like that, where like talking about, oh, hey, chill this fan project, and it gets canceled. And it was interesting to me because I was like, it was like I kind of get it, but it's like I don't know, maybe people like want to talk about their projects, right? I mean, I couldn't imagine people not want you, but I get the point. Is like they don't want people to, rat it out and have Nintendo come after them or something like that.
Yeah, because if you get to a certain point, then people come after like, this is not exactly what you're talking about, but like that Yuzu emulator.
Yeah.
Like once it gets too much attention, then it gets shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So it's an interesting balance between them, especially being media people as we are, to sort of like have that balance between not snitching on people for that, or then like promoting what they're doing, so people care about it.
I will say one thing that works in our favor. You guys are big into Saturn, I'm big into Dreamcast. Sega does not care. like I said, I brought their own prototype back to them, and they're like, "That's cool, man. Anyway, enjoy." Like they didn't even try to confiscate it or anything. Like, they don't care.
They don't care.
They're very cool.
They're much more supportive for sure. And to their, I don't know, almost like that's the thing is Sega seem like they have. So Nintendo's ruthless, right?
Yes.
But they're laser focused, right? Sega almost just they tend to be kind of careless.
Oh yeah, they're
they almost
scattershot.
don't even know what they want to do.
Like I said, I brought this, none of their employees knew what it was. I think one guy, like the one dude who brought me there, told me to go in, he knew. And I think when he just trying to show everybody around it, they're all like, Zoomers, they have no idea what any of this is. Like, we made hardware.
It's like what? It's like I was just here for Atlas.
Yeah.
Trekkie says, well, Sega does care. It's very clear that you are not too used to their official, you're not to use their official libraries of commercial products. Okay,
Yeah, but I'm not trying to sell this.
No, of course not.
I don't know
But
if
I mean, yeah, so they care to a degree for sure. But
Yeah, well, here's the thing with that.
Yeah.
So I will counter that with Sega has a thing called their Searchlight program.
Yeah.
So basically, if you develop something with their brand to a certain point,
right,
they're like, don't do that. We're going to hire you to do that.
right.
So that's how Sonic Mania got.
Is that like the head candidate or Chris White?
Right. So what happened with that is this is a game that nobody remembers for the Xbox 360, I think maybe around PS3. Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Part 2. Anybody remember this?
I remember that. Yeah.
You remember? Okay.
Yeah.
So the same day that came out, I think it was Christian Whitehead released his own like fan-made Sonic game that was way better. And Sega was like, cease and desist, you can't do that. And under the table, they're like, you make good Sonic games, come work for us. Like, 7 years later, you
the
got
whole
Sonic game.
fan scene makes some of the most amazing Sonic games.
So a lot of the revival games that Sega did have come from fan passion.
Right.
Streets of Rage 4, for example,
Yeah.
was born of that. I think that Panzer Dragoon remake was born of that.
Yeah.
There was one that was, and then Sega was like, that's not good enough. You hear about that game Taxi Chaos?
No, I don't think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, I don't like it. So Taxi Chaos was a Switch game that was Crazy Taxi in spirit. It was like terrible.
Yeah.
So apparently what happened with that originally was like, hey, proof of concept, can we use Crazy Taxi? They're like, we don't know how to make it, so you go ahead. And then they saw the final game, they're like, no.
But
You
like,
can't use it.
But like Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is so excellent, and yet they're gonna go ahead and make like their own
Jet Set Radio
game.
Right, but
instead of maybe like taking that into the fold and kind of like branding
that's
it.
where lawyers get involved.
Yeah.
So like the reason that fan-made Sonic game can't just be like distributed is because Sega doesn't know where any of its assets came from.
Right.
It has to all be made like legalese under the hood, which is why you just have to make something from scratch.
Yeah, I think we talked about that. I don't know if it's you or somebody else, where we talked about like with fan projects, like even if it's like something so little as, oh yeah, this license of Photoshop is illegitimate, that could be legal
That can kill the
grounds.
whole thing.
Like yeah,
That's
it's
true,
it's
yeah.
it's fascinating. Like I can't remember what was the topic.
It was
Yeah,
Audi.
Audi Sorley. That's what it was.
He has to. His due diligence, like he has to make sure that every copy of every software had a legal license.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you can't find out after the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, they did it with a pirated copy of Photoshop or whatever. Because then you just kind of have to start all over again, in terms of that asset.
Precisely. Hence, they want all the games we made in-house.
But anyway, the reason I bring up Frog Bowl's game is that I feel, by and large, so Adam has done videos on Dreamcast for over a decade. It's been more than a
15
decade.
years.
Okay, so because I was watching your videos 15 years ago with the sheet. Is that a sheet on
The
his
tablecloth. It's still there.
His famous hands.
Yeah, I still got them.
Got this.
So it's the hands.
Yeah, you're like a hand double.
They haven't gone anywhere.
No, but I mean, like, so watching those videos 15 years ago, I think that Adam's kind of covered almost everything that you possibly could cover in terms of the existing Dreamcast library. No?
No. There's a bunch of stuff we're talking about hardware, right?
We're just talking about like commercial game library.
I barely even started.
You barely even started?
So hardware-wise, there was a bunch of stuff I never did because it's like, how many times can you do a video on a different brand of controller extender?
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like there's stuff like that.
Well, no, okay.
There are some more extreme examples, like different racing wheels.
I just feel like the most exciting thing going on these days in these scenes collectively is the fan-made stuff.
Oh, definitely.
Either the patches, like for example, Derek Pasquarello, who's
yes,
in the Dreamcast scene, just dipped his toe into the Saturn scene by translating Rabbit, which was
back to the Dreamcast scene. We need more English patches.
I'm gonna beat you up there. Run.
I talked about it today. No, you get back in there, and you give me more VGA patch games.
No, I know. I got to play that the other day, and I was just like, oh my god, finally! For years I've been trying to play Bangai-O.
We should explain that problem.
Oh,
yeah.
So
we're literally just like
we're just talking. Sorry guys, I know you're super fans over now.
Do either of you guys play Dreamcast? Are you familiar with the VGA adapters and everything? Yeah. And so there are some games for the longest time. What you would maybe have to like force VGA mode, or you would just have to. You would just have to settle for.
You have to play with the JoJo in the corner.
So I can even give you numbers on that. So there's about 800 games worldwide for the Dreamcast.
Right.
About 100 of them don't have the VGA code in them.
Right.
And of that 100, like 55, you can use force boot or code breaker and just put that in first, and then it'll fix it.
Right.
But that other like 45 or so, like you just can't do anything. But guys like Derek, although I don't know if he specifically, my buddy Razor, who's in my Discord server, I know he's working on stuff like that all the time. They're like rebuilding it or recompiling it. Like Bangai, a perfect example, where they're like, okay, let's fix the problem, and they put VGA code back into it. I think they've done like 10 of them at this point.
Right.
Like that's one of them. Dino Crisis, MTV Skateboarding, WWF Attitude, I think is one of them.
Okay.
There's a few others. Some of them they're actually tackling are odd, like the Japanese ones that you wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
I forget which one. There's one where they did the double whammy, where they translated it and VGA patched it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't remember off the top of my head what it was. But if they're watching, they could probably look it up.
Yeah, I still think the craziest thing is that some games are actually RGB incompatible.
Yeah, that's an obscure fact. Like I did not know that was the case but there's no game that's both RGB and VGA compatible.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, there's not one where you like have to use composite.
Yeah, because I think the issue was that a lot of the Capcom games, this is just theory crafting. I think the reason why they were RGB patches because they were worried that people would literally just get a Dreamcast, shove it into their arcade, like wire up the controller and just do that, versus getting a Naomi system, and they want to save money on that. Because I know that, that's just a theory though that I'm thinking. Because a lot of them are Capcom incompatible. Like I think one of the JoJo ones.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Yeah, the stock version of that, the standard one, you're right, is VGA incompatible. The Japanese reissue called For Matching Service, which is their Japanese literal translation for online,
right?
To match and have a match
Yeah.
service. That one, not only did they have a bug fix, they had some extra characters and VGA patch. So that version does exist. You remind me, I think one of the King of Fighters games, none of those are like VGA compatible.
Yeah, it's really weird.
You got a good point. That's an interesting little conspiracy theory that might actually have some water to it.
Yeah, because I know Neo Geo did some. Like, there actually was Neo Geo. I've seen people that actually took the AES and wired that into an arcade machine and saved money on an MVS.
Which is ironic because it was meant to kind of be the other way around.
Yeah, it's wild.
And Neo Geo is a whole other animal.
Yeah, but I thought it was really funny. I was talking to Derek about that because he had an issue with the light gun on when he was his latest one he did. What was it? The Death Crimson.
I forgot you finished that.
Yeah.
Finished Death Crimson too.
Yeah.
And added several little enhancements to it. It's quite a piece. I was actually playing that the other day too, and that's fantastic.
That game's good. I suck.
In fact, and so on the topic of Rabbit, I do want to mention since
that is a great game, by the way.
This show is being done in such a different format that I can't really feature the brilliant writing of one of our writers on the website, Dan Trax. He wrote up a nice article on Rabbit, obscure fighter on the Saturn that I highly recommend folks check out. It is, I would actually say that it maybe qualifies as a hidden gem.
I hate that quote too. Yeah.
But I mean,
you're
literally nobody talks about it, and it's from a company called Aorn. We did a podcast like years ago where we talked about it, but
it's like obscure fighters or something.
I never hear anybody talk about Rabbit, and it's actually pretty good.
I agree with you. And the best part about that, because I show it on Pluto at a bunch of shows.
Yeah, okay.
I have it on the station here.
Okay.
And the part that always blows everybody's mind is it's a Japanese exclusive Saturn game made by EA, or at least published by EA.
Published
Yeah.
by EA.
By
in
EA in Japan.
Yeah.
And you're like,
That's like the equivalent of like those weird times when we would get like a one-off published in the U.S. by a Japanese publisher.
yeah, I can't even think of a good example of that.
No, it's when I saw that, Aorn, never heard of them.
Yeah.
EA, but not in America.
Yeah,
Just
it's so bizarre.
and
It seems like that situation was probably like, oh, we're going to bring it over, so EA will do it. And then EA probably had all those sports games problems that we had towards the end of the and they were just like, the hell with it.
it's kind of reminiscent too of like the Far East of Eden fighting game. It has that kind of flavor to it. It's a really good game. I highly recommend that if you guys want to download a copy, or at least you want to download the patch, so you can
Buy it legally.
patch your
We all know
legal
you're
copy.
buying legally.
Check out SegaSaturnShiro.com. It's like one of the top articles right now, and Dandrax did a great article just talking all about it. I highly
We'll probably
recommend
talk
it.
about it in the next show as well.
It is a really good game, though. Like, I find that when I display Pluto at different cons or whatever and have it set up, like there's certain games that get people's attention more than others. Rabbit always brings people up because they're always like, what is this?
Actually, that's a good point. Dave, remind
They're
me.
suggesting that the Pluto deserves its own chair.
Yeah,
I mean, it could, but then nobody would see it.
When nobody said, no,
Yeah,
they would
I
see
can
it if you put it on the edge closest to you.
So if I just
put an edge where it falls
precariously
off,
hang it off
yeah.
the chair,
Precariously hang it off.
Put it in a very
Let's
Gary
just, like,
angle.
can you
Make
see
it
this?
as close
Is
to
that better
you as
somehow?
Yeah, guys, say one in the chat.
So let me just point out.
You can totally see it. It's
Okay, as long as
it's
you can
right
see it.
there. It's
So-
right there in the foreground.
Oh, good. So everybody doesn't know the history of that thing, I will point this out. So, like I said, there's only 2 of these finalized. There's one, if you look up the Sega Pluto online, you'll see one, like this photo of a black one that says Sega Saturn on the lid. That is not this one. This is the one made right before it.
Right.
The other one, after we started making videos about this one, the guy who owned the other one contacted us, and he basically said, like, I'm going to sell mine. Thanks for making all these videos. And he was like, we asked him, like, how much do you think you're going to get? Because none of them had ever been sold before, so you have no idea what the parameter would be. And he was like, I'm hoping for $3,000. And we were like, good luck. Like, we didn't think anybody would care, because, like, every video we had made, every show we had taken to was just like, oh, I don't know what that is, I don't care. He ends up getting $84,000.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And so you're telling me just precariously hanging off the chair. And I don't even own it.
I don't
I want that to be
consider
very clear. This is my buddies.
It looks pretty.
I'm sure it's
comfy, dude. It's comfy. It's
Yeah.
vibing. It's vibing.
Yeah.
It's fine.
If anybody cares, I'll talk about this too. Since nobody's we haven't even mentioned it.
Yeah, let's talk about the
So
dinner.
what is that? What
Okay.
is that anyway?
So this is, you're probably looking at it if you're like, you know your video games at all. You're like, oh, that's the Atari Jaguar. I know that. Why is it kind of weird and why is it white? So if you know the Atari Jaguar story at all, even only through memes, you may be vaguely aware of this rumor that after Atari went out of business, suddenly the Jaguar became dental equipment.
Mhm.
Not a rumor. That happened.
Right.
So there was this guy named Steve who works at a company called Imogen, which is still around, and their whole business is dental equipment. And so when Atari went under, he was like working on the next iteration of his camera design. Like, have you ever been to the dentist's office and you go in there and you see like a thing on the wall that's got like little tubes that come up and they go to your mouth?
Yeah.
That's actually what this is.
Yeah.
And so he was working on his next generation of it, and he finds out that this company called Atari that he vaguely remembered from the 70s was going out of business and selling everything. And so he was like, oh, I guess I could just buy new shells and then do R&D, whatever. So he bought the molds for like $1,400.
Mhm.
I thought it would be way more, but no, it was like the rights to the molds and all of them. Here's $1,400, whatever, it's done.
Right.
And so he then decided, okay, I'll make it into my own thing, not understanding there was any sort of video game history of this thing. So he makes thousands of the shells, and if you're ever into the Atari scene, the Jaguar scene, you'll see those white shells everywhere. People like to get them to make the Jaguar look different. They custom paint them, whatever. That was originally meant for dental equipment.
Right.
But the actual board, the thing that is a functional camera, he only made 4 of those. And he only ever sold 2 because of 2 reasons. One, I don't really know dental equipment at all, clearly not my field, but these pieces of technology are very expensive. This originally retailed for $20,000.
Well,
And
that's not right.
And the idea behind that was cameras are really expensive. And so he was trying to save everybody money. So like when you go to a dentist's office and you see they have multiple offices and they all have that dock,
Yeah.
rather than buy a camera for every single one, he was like, I'll make it portable. So then it's got this connection interface and you just whichever office needs it, you just unplug it and plug it in. So you can only buy it once instead of buying like 10 of them. Right. So it actually made a lot of sense.
Okay.
The problem was at the bottom, its interface is SCSI technology, which is like 1980s tech.
Right.
Which sounds like, oh, well, he made it in the 90s, right? No, this was 2004.
That makes sense.
And so by that point, everybody's like, I need USB, dude. Like that would be like if today somebody was like, yeah, ours, it's USB 1. Is that good enough? It's like, no.
Yeah, the medical fields are all this like really slow with the technology adoption. Like I literally bought like a salvage thing for PBMs, and like the date on them, it was like for a colonoscopy machine. The date was like last certified 2014. I'm like, oh wow, it's not.
Yeah, so I had let's see, it would have been, I had an internship at a game company that did, worked with silicon graphics machines, and that was in 1998, I would say, and even then we had SCSI drives that, and those were getting long in the tooth, like people were trying to like move on to like SATA or whatever,
Sure.
But you had these SCSI drives that we had to use because they had huge capacities. Well, we're talking like 7 gigabytes. But yeah, like essentially, SCSI was already long in the tooth by like that time. Exactly. So by the 2000s, that would be.
Yeah, it was totally dead technology. So he only made 4. He only ended up selling 2 of them. And a buddy of mine ended up getting a job over at Imogen. Funny enough, because he bought these Jaguar shells online, found out they were shipped like down the street from where he lived. He's like, let me just go over there and get more. Right. And it turns out he's meeting the guy who did all this. Tells him the whole story. And my buddy's an engineer, so he's like, you need a job? And he just starts working.
Right.
And then one day, the guy who had bought the only 2 of these ever contacts Steve, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna finally retire these 2 units. Like, what do I do? Throw them away, who cares? And then he called him back. He's like, no, wait, are those hot rods? This thing's called the hot rod. And he's like, if you don't want them, I'll send a guy out to come get them. Nice. So my buddy drove halfway across California to this one office that actually bought them. And he picked them up, and his fee was to get to keep one. So there are 4 of these. 3 of them are back in the Imogen office. This is the only one in private hands. Nice. And it's my buddy Jesse's. He loaned it to me so that people could see it. But like,
it was just a magnet.
People just loan me stuff like this that's like way too expensive that I have no right to possession.
Wasn't it? Did you even like have it working too? Like that?
Yes. With PRGE. It wasn't even this one. We had 3 of the 4.
That was one of the.
We had 3 of the 4 of them.
And you guys had it hooked up with other. Yeah. There was a bunch of other hardware.
So Steve, when they built the thing, they were like, "Yeah, we have all this stuff for it." And Steve was a pack guy. He's like, "We only demoed it once. It was like CES, like I don't know, 2004."
Right.
And he's like, just packed it all away. So then my buddy's like, "If you're cool with it, like, let me bring all this stuff." And so we brought it to PRGE, set it up, and for the first time ever, people could take photos of their mouth because that's what it's supposed to be. That thing that goes in your mouth. And like, you could do it. So unfortunately, I don't have the whole rig with me. I just have this part. But like,
but you can still stick an Atari Jaguar cartridge.
Yeah, it just won't fit. People always ask, like, what does that do then?
Yeah.
RAM. It's got buttons and stuff. Like he didn't know what to do with the controller, so he just put like plastic over it.
I see that.
But the power button's the same. Like for extra RAM and all that.
I'm sure somebody has. Oh no, wait. I was gonna say, I'm sure somebody has wanted to like take one of those and turn it into a Jaguar.
Yeah, but like the thing is, the board is not in any way a Jaguar.
Not at all. Yeah.
But the shells, yeah.
They just had all those shells.
I think the funniest thing about this though is that if you know the Atari Jaguar history at all,
right.
So Atari sells the molds, like I just said.
Yeah.
Now eventually, Steve held on to the rights to that forever. Now, if anybody remembers the Coleco Chameleon,
right?
Yep.
What ended up happening with that is that Mike Kennedy went to Steve being like, "I want to buy the rights to those molds," and Steve's like, "No, whatever. Like, I'm not doing it."
Yeah.
So then Mike Kennedy does his whole thing.
Right.
He ends up selling it to someone else over at Atari Age.
Right.
And Atari Age held on to the rights but never did anything with it. Atari just bought Atari Age like a few months ago. So Atari ipso facto just rebought their own molds. Okay. This just happened like a few months ago.
That's
full circle.
So this is like the weird half cousin. Like, in this.
What's gonna happen there?
My friend actually has in the hall, he actually has a built Coleco, because I guess Kenny sold some of the molds that he can, like the shells.
Yeah, a few of the shells.
So yeah, no, he has actually a whole Jaguar built for that. I don't know if he still has it, I'll ask him. But yeah, and I guess technically in this building we could potentially have 3 different versions of the Jaguar.
It could be technically 4, but I don't know if Atari Age ever did anything.
There's a question from the comments. So is that a copy of Snatcher in your
It is
lab?
indeed a copy of Snatcher. It's indeed a
What is
legit
the
copy of
what is the
Snatcher.
provenance of that copy of Snatcher? How did you come by that?
We just did a whole video of it. Yeah, we're just
Well, we
scanning.
haven't posted
Yeah.
it yet, so nobody.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, it'll be up by the time this gets released, but like on the audio side of it. But yeah, Dave and I was filming. We were just looking at stuff like, oh hey, look, Snatcher, and I'm like,
It was $1,000.
yeah, 1,000. I was like, oh, it's like yeah, it's a
He's
little
like,
bit.
what's your best price? And I literally just pulled
800.
out of my ass.
And they're like 850, and I'm like, they were like, and then we were tagged. Is like, how about 825? I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can take it all on $25. So
there you
I've got a copy of Snatcher now. So now I have Snatcher. So yeah, Kojima love complete. Yeah, there we go. Got the tattoo and stuff. So yeah, I guess I need.
We're just waiting on a Saturn translation, right?
Yeah, Saturn.
Nod, hint, nod, Derek, Pascal.
Derek,
Translate
Snatcher.
Snatcher on Saturn.
Snatcher and Dreamcast.
True.
Yeah, you just have to do a
That was
translation.
actually in the works.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, like, I
There's
love
more to
the
that
Sega
story,
CD
but
version. I love the Sega CD version, the music and everything like that. But I mean, the Saturn version is pretty cool too.
Yeah, I prefer the Sega CD soundtrack. But shouts out though, if you guys want on vinyl, I think they're still selling it on Ship to Shore phono company, or something. I forgot the name of Ship to Store, whatever. They're a pretty good record company. I know a couple people that work there.
Full disclosure,
So-
Pat did not use SHIRO funds.
Yeah, I did not use SHIRO funds, so don't. All the Patreon members that listen to this,
Drain his own bank account.
I did not drain the SHIRO funds, so don't at me. Don't cancel me on Twitter.
Finally, the Snatcher fund has paid out.
please.
That's what Neil Henderson said.
Wow, yeah,
Oh
about
my
time,
God.
yeah.
Pat is glowing.
I'm happy. It's a surreal.
You never
happy.
emote though. Like this is your version of happy. I am happy.
I am happy.
I just got
You're just
more
like, I
electricity.
sleep my emotion.
Pat's never
Exactly.
happier than when he buys a new Steely Dan record.
Yeah, when I get the Steely Dan records, that's when I'm the happiest. When I can have what's his name, Dan Fagan, have me go to sleep. Donald Fagan, sing me to sleep.
So you and I were having an interesting conversation earlier
Yes.
about collecting cycles.
Yes.
Maybe we can do that.
So yeah, it was a little existential.
Right.
It was
I
a
realize
little-
our pool sample here is a little small, but we also have the online one. Is anybody out here like looking for anything specific while they're at the con, trying to collect anything?
Yeah, like what are you guys here for?
Alien vs. Predator on Jaguar.
Excellent.
Alien versus Predator on Jaguar.
Actually, it's funny. I was talking to a guy today who said that was one of the reasons that one of the best games on the Jaguar is the Jaguar has two processors in it, called the Tom and the Jerry.
Yeah,
And one of them is the inferior processor, and that's how almost all the games were built.
yeah.
Most people didn't know how to use the second one. Alien vs. Predator is one of the only games where the developer knew how the kit
Knew how it
worked,
worked,
and so he
yeah.
was able to use both, which is why it's one of the better games. So, anyway, yes, it's the second time somebody's brought that game up.
What are you guys here for?
I don't even know where they sell games here.
Oh, downstairs, there's like a whole big room.
Yeah, downstairs on the huge show floor, like there are several vendors.
Bunch of vendors, yeah.
that are selling used games mostly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the point we're trying to make is that, if you're here for a certain thing, it's probably something that you maybe wanted when you were a kid. Like, did you want Alien vs. Predator as a kid?
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Found in the store.
Right, so you are a millennial.
81.
Yep, he's an old millennial. Don't worry, we're millennials too, 86 over here.
We're all preaching to the choir.
Yeah, exactly. So our point was demographics are kind of a key thing when it comes to video games, and you can kind of predict when games are going to get expensive versus when they're going to get cheap if you understand that.
Right.
Because currently the stuff that's really expensive is 6th generation stuff. So Dreamcast, GameCube, mostly. Obviously PS2 and Xbox also, but not as much. And
There's a lot more for those consoles.
well, there's also nobody talks about the new one, Justice for the New One, which you should know because it's the sequel to the Jaguar.
Oh, is that thing that melts in your hands? The new one? Is that it?
That's the DVD player.
Oh, the DVD player one. I was
Yeah.
thinking of the one that like melts the plastic one. What am I thinking of? The handheld one. I don't remember. Sorry, I think I'm a bit crazy and loopy today.
Oh, Casio.
The Casio Loopy. Ooh, I want one of those. Everyone's getting a Casio Loopy. What is with this?
That was my fault. I made a video about the Loopy. I did. I'm not really taking credit for that.
No, it's like everyone's getting a Loopy. Like I feel like I need to get a Loopy.
You don't.
Old folks are complaining about the audio. What can you do, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of slapback in this room.
There's echo,
Because
yeah.
there are no people in the room. Okay, like
What are you talking about? These are our heroes.
We lost two people.
We lost two
I'm
people
so
who thought this is
sorry,
where the show
Yeah,
floor
there were
was.
2 people that were lost. They came in, now they're gone. But no, like when there's no bodies in
That
here,
was like
the sound bounces off the walls. But anyway, we will upload the audio from the board and just do like a live later. But anyway, you were
right. So the point I was trying to make is that when it comes to, if you ever want to collect stuff, it's good to understand a little bit about demographics and generations of game consoles and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is the reason 6th generation stuff is expensive right now is mostly the people who are buying tons of it are the people who were kids when it came out.
Right.
And they're basically just trying to rebuy their childhood. This is not a new phenomenon. This happened with us. Like you yourself are trying to do it. But because I'm guessing you're a little over 40 now.
43.
There you go. Because you're like that, you're kind of the holdover, just like us. The number one consumer base for anything is basically the people who are right out of college up until like their early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
The reason you're like that is because you don't have a house yet, you don't have your own family yet, you don't have like, that's just when you're in your consumer base. So you start working towards like, especially when you're right out of college. Because when you're right out of college, your whole life has been like, well, I'm supposed to go to school. And now you're like, I'm going to enter the workforce. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. There's no automatic plan. So you kind of panic a little and you start buying your childhood.
You go one way, you buy your childhood or you buy the Ferrari. But I guess technically it's the same.
But that's the thing, you do both.
You do both.
See, people start buying a house, they start buying cars, etc. That's just economics. That's how it drives forward. But inevitably they get to a point where they turn into guys our age.
Right.
And when that happens, normal people, not us, will start selling some of that stuff off, and then the prices go down.
Right.
So for us, it's a lot of 3rd generation, 4th generation, 5th generation stuff. And you start being like, well, I got a kid, so I can't do this anymore. I bought a house, I got a mortgage, I can't do this anymore. So you start selling some of the stuff off.
Yeah.
And the prices go down. So a few years back, everything on Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis was crazy hot. Now it's like, well, I mean, it's still kind of expensive, but now it's more readily available. Super Nintendo games have come down back into your $20 range in a lot of cases.
Yeah, you don't spend $50 on Mario games.
You don't have to anymore. And that's because all that stuff gets dumped right back out. But this all happens on a wave.
Yeah.
To the point where we were talking about eventually stuff gets old enough where people don't care at all, like Atari 2600.
Basically, yeah.
Except the people who do care about Atari 2600 are now the old Gen Xers, whose kids have finally moved out.
Mm-hmm.
And once they moved out, they're like, I have more income. I don't have to pay for my kids anymore. They're out of here. It's my time to shine. I can retire a little bit. What do I want to do? I'm going to rebuy my childhood. And then Atari stuff goes right back up.
Right.
But it's not as high of an increase.
Because then you have like these compilations and these like, digital clips doing like these Atari, who did Atari 50? Was that
I think it was digital.
Yeah.
And that was a great collection.
With stuff like, it's a great collection and so well done that it's kind of like everything right there. You don't really need to go out hunting for.
You don't. But imagine let me put it this way. You're a Saturn Super fan, obviously.
Sure.
Sega puts out a Saturn Super collection.
Right.
Are you going to be like, well, I don't need my discs anymore?
No, but
Exactly.
okay, I have a point to that though. See, I have a huge wall of Saturn long box games, right? And I mean, I could put my kids through college with that, but I won't.
Because we're at
Sorry, Dave's kids, you have to get through college.
Dave's kids, you're on your own. Dad sucks.
No, college, who needs college? No, but seriously, like,
You
I used to buy games to play them, right? Like, I used to buy discs to play them until my Saturn laser burned out, right? And then found myself just going to the ODE because it's so much simpler.
Right.
And then I would look over at that wall and just say, that's the physical embodiment of all of the love that I have for this console. But in reality, I don't take a book off the shelf and read it. I fire it up on the ODE because it's so convenient. It's almost like having a library of high def vinyl, but playing everything on your iPod. Because you're like, well, I own them over there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's rough.
Well, I kind of disagree with that analogy because vinyl and listening on like iPod high res is kind of almost two different things.
It is. Like listening to vinyl is something you do deliberately. You put on a vinyl,
Yeah.
you almost have to babysit the record, and flip it and listen. But I mean, with games, I would love to pull, I would love to pull a game off the shelf, read the manual, and pop in the disc. But it's like ever since my laser burned out like 2 years ago, I've honestly just been going like the convenience route.
How do you not own more than one Saturn?
I do. They're in storage.
SaturnDave
Okay.
can't own one
Okay,
Saturn that
fine.
doesn't work.
Yes, to be fair, I own like 5 Saturns, but most of them are in storage, and I just have it. I'm lazy.
Go on the show floor. Go do what I do. Yahoo auction Japan.
But I'm glad you brought up how old are your kids?
10.
Okay.
My son's 10.
Wait another 8 years or so when they're supposed to go to college, and you're like, how much do I really need this?
Right.
I have that ODE. I can play everything on there. Why do I care about the vinyl on the wall?
I've told myself that it doesn't exist. I'm like,
Yeah,
it's
you
not-
tell yourself that now.
It doesn't,
Wait
it's not-
until this college bill comes up.
I know.
I'm telling you, you're like any normal person, you're susceptible to demographics.
Mhm.
And the other thing with predicting trends and like where these games might eventually get cheaper is we have to accept the fact right here when it comes to like particularly the oldest of video games, not including like tennis for two like in the 1950s, which was not something anybody could really own. Your first commercially available stuff was the 1970s. And the generation that had that is again called the Gen Xers.
Right.
They're not in retirement yet. They're still in the workforce. They're going to be around. We have not entered as a species. We've not lived long enough with the technology to find out what happens when the oldest generation of video games does not have its original owners alive anymore. So we have meaning. Every kid, who like had Atari, there's still kids. There are people in their 50s, 60s who played Atari stuff as kids. They're around. But if you look at other mediums where the people who grew up on as kids just don't exist anymore, like silent films,
Right.
nobody really goes back and looks at those.
Right.
Except for super fans who are like, I had to go to film school, so they made us watch that stuff.
Or the archivists that just found it at yard sales for
Yeah.
$5. Oh, hey, look, it's Cleopatra. Who would have guessed?
That's not even, that's a big movie. I'm talking about silent films like 1920s.
Oh, you're talking about earlier. Okay,
And
that's
even,
still, yeah.
and even if they do, they're probably watching it in some archived format. They're not like actually playing.
They're not sitting there playing like a
projector.
8mm reel.
Yeah,
that they
yeah.
up
It was in the
somehow.
Library of Congress or something.
Yeah, exactly. So what I guess I'm depressingly kind of saying is your video games will get to that point,
Mhm.
but in a weird way, you'll be dead, so you won't care.
Yeah, I'll be way dead before it would really matter, like, hear what happens to Saturn. So that's going to be
Yeah.
next generation's problem. Listen to our podcast and learn from that, and just,
Yeah, and I mean,
just
part
bury
of
me with my
the
Dreamcast is good.
part of the challenge, I guess, or part of the, for me at least, is trying to figure out how to engage younger audiences.
Yes, I want you to talk
with
about
this
that.
stuff. So it was last year. It was PRGE. I come to Adam and I ask him this because I've been thinking, like I'm 40, midlife crisis area, and I'm starting to ask myself like existential questions, like, what is it all for? Like, and Adam gives you this funny answer, like, I'm just too busy to think about this shit.
At PRGE, I have like 100 tasks to do. I'm like,
It's like,
I'm running.
Dave, I'm sorry, I don't have time.
I don't have time for
Yeah.
long-winded questions, man. I gotta
I was like,
blockbuster
"You guys are
things.
busy."
PRGE, I had to run the Jaguar unit. I had to
Yeah,
run
yeah,
the Pluto, sort of.
Yeah.
I mostly delegated that to you. I had to do the Blockbuster tournament.
Yeah,
I had
no,
a lot of
you
stuff
really
going on.
are. You
Like,
really do.
here, hey.
But no, you start to ask these questions, and you start to ask the question, this console, whether it's Dreamcast or whether it's Saturn, that I love and that I've invested, 15 years into YouTube videos and content like that. How long before nobody cares about it? How long
That's the
before? And in terms of where it is right now, are we already on the downhill?
Well,
Like
I said, it's generation.
right?
So keep in mind, even though Gen X is the oldest of us that had access to video games as children, they're still in the workforce. They're not even retiring yet. So
Right.
there's a lot of time left before we see the first example of that.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is obviously I can't predict perfectly how kids will feel about it. I mean, you have kids. Like you if you expose them to the right stuff, like they can be fans of stuff. I'm not saying they can't. But it's diminishing returns.
It is. It is.
It's trying to think about how long humans have existed,
Mhm.
and the earliest forms of entertainment. Like how many of us were like, oh man, cave paintings.
Mhm.
We don't
I'm down
focus
with
on that.
paintings.
When does it get to the point where video games are, at least the ones we grew up on, are studied more as a subject of history
Right.
as opposed to entertainment?
Right.
We already live in a world where there are video game museums.
Yes. Yeah. We're fossils.
You've seen that meme probably where you see a glass case and a bunch of video game systems in there. It's like you've reached the point where your childhood is behind glass.
I mean, I feel like Marty McFly. The kids are like, you have to use your hands.
It's a baby store.
I don't want to be grim, but the same thing happened to me when I went to the 9/11 museum. It was just weird seeing all these modern things in the museum. It's like, this shouldn't be here, but I know why it's supposed to be here.
Yeah.
It's just weird, seeing the juxtaposition of a cell phone that your dad owned, or like a pager that your mom used, or like, the cell phone you call with your friends on. Like, oh.
For the record, this is just millennials realizing that we're older than.
Basically,
That's what we're going through.
But I mean, so there are some fringe youngsters in our communities that are either, I don't know, like you said, their parents exposed them to that console when they were young, so now they have some kind of, they were engaged with it, and they realized that it was great. You always, and then of course you do have younger generations, not a ton, but those younger generations that choose to kind of go back and look at music from the 60s or the 70s, or games from earlier generations, because maybe they like the appeal of how simple it is. Maybe they like that it's a one and done. You buy a disc and pop it in and it works, and you don't have to worry about servers being online or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, they're.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I don't pretend to always know where that comes from. I know that is a thing. You're 100% right. Like, this actually happened to me like a week ago.
Right.
So in my apartment building, I was taking the elevator down, and like it stops on like the 7th floor or something. This guy gets on, and he has a Dreamcast shirt on.
Right.
But he was like 20, and I was like, I couldn't help but comment on it because I was like, if he's a fan of the Dreamcast, there's some chance he's gonna know who I was. But he was also 20, so he had no clue who I was because I started making YouTube videos when he was 5. Right. But I just like, oh man, the Dreamcast is awesome. He's like, oh dude, it's my favorite system. And I was like, how did that happen? Like, like he didn't explain that because we were just on an elevator. But I was like, I told him like I have a full collection. He's like, really? Like I've got like 5 games.
How has he not even heard of Mr.
I'm not.
It's not a.
It's not
a regular thing.
But you're probably like, I like.
I
was
was
just
a
baffled.
If there's a single
There is like a single male dude who likes the Dreamcast, who's collecting it, no clue who I was, which is totally fine.
Want to smack your head on the wall like, what? Are you kidding me?
No, I'm saying
no, of course.
It's actually probably better because we live in the same building.
Sure.
You don't want to knock on your door.
Yeah, I'd be like, come see it now. Like, no.
You got the Divers 2000. I just want to play a couple games.
Yeah, I do have it. Go away.
Oh yeah, now he knows that there's an entire.
No, I didn't tell him my name. I just told him I had a full set. But like, anyway, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But my point of that story was like that dude was probably born like in 2003, like when the Dreamcast was well over.
Yeah.
Aside from a couple of Japanese releases.
Yeah.
And it's like, how did you develop that? I just didn't have time to have that conversation. It's probably because a good parent like yourself was like, well, my kid's gonna be the right one.
Yeah. I mean, I did with my younger siblings. My siblings are like 7 and 10 years younger than I am, and they know Space Channel 5 and all these games because I'd sit there and play it. And I was like, well, yeah, the up, down, left, right, shoot, shoot game, right? It's like, yeah, that one. And it's funny because like we wanted to see Sonic together. I was like, oh yeah, there's Space Channel 5, there's Toy Commander, there's this and that. It's like because I played all these games and they're just sitting there watching me. It's just cool, like people are sitting there watching, playing them, and it's like enjoying them and taking this. Oh, these are amazing games, even though they're 20 years old or older than I am. Just really cool.
It's I know we were talking about this too. Like so I had an interesting. I think part of the reason I like as much old stuff as I do is because my mom accidentally screwed me up in that regard. So like when I was a kid, in '93 specifically, like all my cousins, my friends either had a Super Nintendo, a Sega Genesis, whatever. My mom's plan was to get them for Christmas, but I'm complaining about it like the beginning of the year, and so she just like just wait, But that doesn't work for a kid. So by like the summer, I had annoyed her enough times that she got me an Atari 2600 she had just had, like when she was younger. And so like I would play it and I understood that this was cool. Like I liked Space Invaders, I liked combat, I was having fun with it.
Yeah.
But the social element of that is like you go to the school and you go playground, whatever, and kids are talking Donkey Kong or Sonic, and I'm like, Space Invaders, yo, and they're like, what are you talking about? So you can find those kids who were raised that way, one reason or another. Yeah. But they're always gonna be the outliers.
Yeah.
And that's to be expected.
I mean, that's what I am.
Yeah,
and the Sega Saturn, like,
yeah.
I didn't have anybody to share it with back in the day. I kind of am a broken record in that regard. Like I would say, the reason why SHIRO exists, number one, is to create a community that bolsters the Saturn and creates more conversation around the Saturn, because it's not something I got to enjoy back in the 90s.
And this is a testament to Sega's poor marketing. And I don't know if you've ever heard me tell this story before, but I legitimately did not know the Saturn was a thing until after the Dreamcast was developed.
Right.
Weirdly same here. Yeah, I think that's my same story. Like I didn't even know that the Saturn was a thing until like 2005, and it's like, and I lived on the East Coast, and I think we both lived in big cities, so you think,
Chicago.
you'd think they, advertise there a little bit, like maybe a little bit of like a giant banner in New York City, but I don't know, maybe that's just
Access to information it's like the internet was in its infancy back then, so you couldn't just like go on a search engine and type up,
Right, of course.
what I really want to play Daytona USA, what plays that, or so you had to find out, and then when you're a kid, you have even less autonomy in terms of like being able to go.
Oh, I imagine we could talk about the history of Sega and everything they did wrong for hours.
Oh, sure,
It's a
yeah.
delicious conversation. But the Pluto here, if we want to kind of round this out,
Yeah, definitely.
is kind of a perfect symbolic example of how Sega didn't know what to do with the Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in Japan, the Saturn was made for the Japanese. It was not made for us. People don't tend to know this. The Sega Genesis Mega Drive in Japan was a flop.
Mhm.
Like it didn't do well, but they had no choice but to support it because it was doing so amazingly here and pretty well in Europe.
Sure.
And so when Japan, Sega being a Japanese company, Japanese pride, they were like, we can't. This was embarrassing. And so they were like, the next one has to be very Japanese centric. Hence the Saturn is what it is. But that didn't really work in North America. It didn't really work in Europe as far as like the mentality of like 2D games. You know what I mean? I mean, you know this.
But I mean, they didn't allow it to work either.
Of course,
it was like
there's a
it was time. It was time for a new console because '89, right? Like,
right. 88.
88. But it's like America didn't want to. They were like, no, we're not ready. We want to like just milk this, the Genesis and 32, 32X thing as much as we can.
That's where it gets even more insane.
Yeah.
So did you know that the Saturn launched on I want to say November 22nd, 1994?
Mm-hmm.
And did you know that the 32X launched on November 21st, 1994 here?
Right.
And because of time zones, that is the same day.
It's the same day because of the time zones, right?
And that means that's how little they understood each other. The 32X made actually a lot of sense. It was like kind of a prosumer idea. Like if Sega, it's like saying, hey, you don't need to spend $300 on your next generation console. Buy this add-on, $150. That's our next generation. It actually made sense, but they could not coexist.
And we were at a point, despite the internet, like I said, being in its infancy, we were still at a point that I like to argue globalization was enough of a thing where you couldn't not know that there was a better next generation console being released over in Japan.
Yep.
So when you took that into account, you were like, should I really spend my money on this, what seems like it might be a stopgap, when they're just going to release that over here if I wait?
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe if the two sides were completely blind to each other.
They were. That's what that is.
Exactly.
So like this was designed by Sega of America, who had the power to force Sega of Japan to build it, and Sega of Japan had the power to never allow them to release it.
That's insane.
This is a perfectly symbolic piece of material to say this is why Sega ultimately failed, because they just could not coexist.
Yeah.
Japanese pride got in the way of American arrogance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 97 document that was uploaded really opened up some eyes on, the real issues with it. That was like insane.
Yeah, that combined with like Sato, his oral histories that he's given and stuff like that, like just give a huge look into just all of the, I don't want to say mismanagement, but just like several
missteps.
Several missteps.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that forever. Like why the Saturn didn't have Genesis compatibility, which would have been amazing here, but it's because the Japanese didn't want it, because then it would have seemed as like a negative.
Right. Yeah.
We can talk about it forever. We only have about a minute left, so
We can take questions though.
do you have any questions?
If you guys have questions, or
Caroline?
if anybody on YouTube that's watching has questions, I'm
Yeah,
reading.
let us know. Look at the
By
chat.
the way, hi Steve.
Yeah, I'm reading.
Oh, hey, Steve, how's it
How's it
going?
going?
You have any questions, Steve?
What time's your panel? Next
It's Sunday.
Oh, right
Your
on.
panel Sunday? Okay.
Otherwise, yeah. If you don't have anything there, then we'll just call it.
Seeing if anybody has any questions. That's,
Get some chat.
yeah, we have some chats going on. We have about 35 people left.
That's fair.
Anybody? No?
Good luck getting Alien vs. Predator. I guess
You guys from Phoenix?
Yeah.
You are? Recommend any good places to eat?
Dave's got food on his mind.
clearly.
I think Osaka. I kind of want to go to Osaka. That'd be cool.
Oh, okay.
We're probably an hour away where we live, so downtown,
Yeah.
we don't really go
doubt.
There's some pretty good places downtown. If you guys
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for being the super fans.
Also of note, Dan Trax, who writes for Sega Saturn SHIRO, just uploaded another story about the Mr. Core. Sound improves drastically on Saturn Mr. Core.
Well, we have it downstairs.
You have a Mr. downstairs.
I'll update that.
You need to update it so that we can download
I literally
the
updated it
sound.
last night before I came here. Now I gotta update it again.
There you go. Yeah, you have to update it again.
I actually need to get Rabbit too. That reminds me. I need to remind me to download that.
That's right. All
I
right.
got a question.
So
So how long did it take? I'm not new how long it took, but it took so many years for Saturn emulation to be good.
The question is, how many years did it take for Saturn emulation to be good?
That's her.
Yeah, like
Well, I mean,
I have the one on the hard drive. I have that.
right.
It's still good, but it's like, what was it? What finally broke before it got good? Because for forever, it was hard to break.
Well, okay, so like, the question is, how long did it take to break the barrier of, making Saturn emulation feasible or good, like,
Yeah, real good.
I'll be honest with you. So there are some emulators that have been around for like over a decade that have run on a potato, basically. It's just that people, so I don't know if you've heard of SSF, but SSF is like this emulator it's closed source, written by this Japanese guy, can't remember his name, but I mean, and they're using that as the core of like the emulation for the City Connection games that are coming out on Switch, so like the
Cotton.
and I mean, it's a solid emulator that has been available for over a decade. But the popular, I almost want to say myth, the popular myth that prevails is that Saturn emulation is impossible or that it's difficult or that. And I mean, I will say the modern, shiny emulators that add like upscaling and, enhanced textures and anti-aliasing and all that garbage. I don't know. It's like, depends on what you want, So if folks really want to emulate Saturn in 4K, then yeah, there's going to be obviously, it's going to require more power out of your machine. But I mean, if you have an old laptop and you download like SSF, you can play Saturn in like native resolution or even like line double it. Yeah, and it plays perfectly fine.
So it's been a few years. It definitely took a while though. I think Nintendo is the one that's more interested.
So I don't mean to be contrarian to your question, but what I mean to say is I feel like that's a rumor that needs to be dispelled, is that the Saturn is necessarily hard to emulate. I mean, if you look at the Polymega, that's something that was supposed to come out several years ago, right? And even then, it was sporting old hardware, So it's like it's like a Coffee Lake PC.
Like in the 2010s probably is when it got really good.
It's like a Coffee Lake
playable,
processor, right? And I mean, that thing runs Saturn just fine. You pop the discs in, and rips it to the hard drive, and it runs them just fine. So
you answered the question probably around 2008, the 2010s. It got pretty good.
But that said, there are some awesome innovations going on with Saturn emulation in terms of, for example, Night of Dragon, who's modifying the BizHawk, which
Chronos.
We gotta wrap it up.
Chronos.
We're over on time.
We're over.
We're over on time. Okay.
So
Anyway, there's a lot
try
of
the Chrono Simulator.
Yeah, go check out Saturn emulation. SegaSaturnShiro.com has a list of every active Saturn emulator. And thanks to Private Eye who's managing that.
And you can come to the table and talk to us about that. We have our magazine, so talk to us all about that. So
check out Adam Corlick.
Adam Corlick's YouTube.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much, guys.
For coming and hanging out with us.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And we'll definitely upload the VOD later with audio. So
Yeah, you guys got it on tape. You guys are all on little tape, like tape
cameras. Yeah. Oh, there is. Yeah. So Sasquatch had a question. Maybe Adam, you can answer it for Adam.
We are over time.
Okay. We'll answer it.
What's the question?
The question is, have you been able to communicate an interest to Sega in more Sega mini consoles, like US Game Gear, Mini, Master System Mini, Dreamcast Mini, anything like that?
Oh, I get where this is coming from because like 2018, they were picking my brain about what to do after the Genesis. And I was like, what about Dreamcast? And they were like, the problem with the Dreamcast is that you either make it really expensive so that it's good, or we have to make it cheap and it just uses PC ports.
Right.
And nobody would be happy.
Right.
So they were waiting for the technology to catch up. But the mini thing is kind of done. The problem with that is that they're not, most of them aren't marketable. You could do a Master System one easily, but only like Europe would care.
Yeah, look at the PlayStation.
Yeah, you might get a limited release here from like Limited Run Games or part of Japan.
Yeah.
Which was also a flop. We kind of got the Sega CD, but that was just for novelty. You're never going to get a 32X one.
Right.
Unless it's just a novelty they throw into another Genesis version.
Yeah.
Saturn, for reasons stated, are somewhat difficult, but and a lot of the source code for those games is gone.
Right.
And it's also not marketable. On top of that, Japan can probably handle it.
That's true.
They don't have another system other than Dreamcast. You might be able to market everybody, but the technology is just not there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's cool.
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
It's SaturnDave and Adam and
I'm not sure. I'm fine with sales for you.
Okay, have fun.
See ya.
I'll have to end the stream on.
Is there a way I can get a picture with the photo?
Yeah, of course. I'll bring it down. Prototype conference.